One wrong step, one whispered word out of turn, and your entire career, your family's entire reputation, is erased in an instant. This isn't just a job, it's a high-stakes psychological survival game played within the most powerful square mile on Earth. Imagine standing perfectly still for 4 grueling hours in a drafty corridor that smells of damp coal and expensive beeswax, waiting for a woman who hasn't smiled in half a decade. It's 1865. You are a royal courtier at Buckingham Palace, and the woman you serve is the grieving Widow of Windsor, Queen Victoria. But forget the grand portraits and the polished gold-leaf ceilings you see in the movies. The reality of life inside these walls was a claustrophobic nightmare of impossible protocols, cutthroat social hierarchies, and secrets so dangerous they could topple the British Empire if they ever made it past the palace gates. Did you know that simply looking the Queen directly in the eyes could get you banished from society forever? Or that every single breath you took was governed by a centuries-old rulebook that shifted like quicksand? We are stepping behind the heavy velvet curtains to live a day in the life of the men and women who sacrificed everything to keep the monarchy breathing. From the grueling morning rituals that began in total darkness to the silent, ghost-like state dinners where a single dropped fork was a national scandal. You're about to see the side of the Victorian court the history books were too terrified to print. Because while the sun never set on the British Empire, inside Buckingham Palace, the shadows were growing, and the price of service was higher than anyone ever told you. To truly grasp the crushing weight of your new life, you have to understand the silence. By 1865, Prince Albert had been dead for 4 years, but inside Buckingham Palace, time stopped the second his heart did. This wasn't a home, it was a cathedral of grief. Your day doesn't start with a majestic sunrise over the mall. It starts at 4:30 a.m. in a servant's quarter so freezing cold you can see your breath. You're shivering, but you can't make a sound. In this house, noise isn't just rude. It's considered a direct insult to the Queen's sorrow. The pressure cooker environment starts before you even put on your uniform. Every single courtier lived and died by a document known as the Lord Chamberlain's Code. Think of it as the most insane corporate HR manual you've ever seen, combined with a script for a play you can never stop acting in. You had to memorize the Table of Precedence, a brutal social hierarchy map dictating exactly who you could speak to and in what order. Make one mistake, like standing an inch too close to a duchess or calling a baronet by the wrong title, and you'd be hit with the freezing out. In the Victorian court, they didn't need a guillotine to end your life. They just needed everyone in the room to collectively pretend you no longer existed. It was social cancellation in its purest, most ruthless form. And then there was the boss, Queen Victoria herself. Her grief had turned the palace into a literal dark room. Everything was draped in black crepe. Even the water bottles had black ribbons. Your job? Be a ghost. You were expected to anticipate her every need without her ever saying a word. If she walked into a room, you didn't just stand at attention, you blended into the wallpaper. You had to master the backwards walk, navigating heavy oak doors and priceless Ming vases in reverse, because turning your back on the sovereign was a fireable offense. Trip? Your career is toast. Cough? You're a liability. The psychological toll was absolutely immense. You were living in the absolute epicenter of global power, the 19th century equivalent of the White House and the Pentagon combined, yet you had less personal freedom than a factory worker. Your letters were screened, your friendships were heavily scrutinized, and your loyalty was tested every single day. You were surrounded by millions of dollars in gold leaf and fine art, but starved for basic human connection. You couldn't even get married without the Queen's permission, which she regularly denied. You were owned by the crown, body and soul. And the stakes weren't just about keeping your job. Your family's entire future was on the line. A recommendation from the palace was the ultimate golden ticket. It could get your brother an army commission or marry your sister into serious money. But getting fired? That was a permanent black mark. You'd go from the heights of global power to the absolute gutter in a single afternoon. In 1865, if you weren't fit to serve the Queen, you were essentially dead to polite society. But here is where the polished, Netflix-perfect image of the Victorian court starts to crack. You'd think a place with this many rules would be a well-oiled, pristine machine. You see the white gloves and marble floors and assume it was the cleanest place on earth. But behind the velvet curtains, the reality was incredibly gritty. While you were sweating over the exact angle of your bow, the floorboards beneath your feet were hiding a toxic secret. Despite the glamour, 1860s Buckingham Palace was a literal death trap of crumbling infrastructure and poisonous fumes that the Queen outright refused to fix. And the person most at risk wasn't just the staff, it was the monarchy itself. You're standing in the Grand Hall, surrounded by enough gold leaf to buy a small country. But take a deep breath. That's not the scent of expensive lilies. That's the smell of raw sewage. In 1865, the world's most famous palace was a plumbing nightmare. The basement was a labyrinth of cesspools that hadn't been emptied in decades. While Victoria sat on her throne, the very ground beneath her was a biohazard. But the smell was actually the safest part of the air. Look at the walls. That vibrant, stunning green wallpaper? It was dyed with Sheila's green, a pigment packed with enough arsenic to kill a small army. Every time you brushed against it, you were absorbing poison through your skin. You were living in a literal gilded cage, and the bars were toxic. But you couldn't open a window to let the fumes out. To the Queen, a draft was a personal attack. So you stood there, inhaling arsenic and methane, forced to maintain a look of stoic devotion. And then came the gas lamps. They were the height of 19th century tech, but they leaked constantly. Between the carbon monoxide and the heavy metal poisoning, the palace staff lived in a state of palace brain, a perpetual fog of headaches, lethargy, and hallucinations. People claimed the corridors were haunted by the ghosts of past kings, but in reality, they were just suffocating. But physical illness was a secondary concern. The real test of your survival happened at the dinner table. Imagine you've been on your feet for 15 hours. You haven't eaten since 4 a.m. You finally sit down for a state dinner. The table is a masterpiece of silver and crystal, loaded with pheasant, venison, and exotic fruits. Your stomach is screaming. But here is the catch. Victoria is a speed eater. She consumes multiple courses with the efficiency of a machine, and the rule of the court is absolute. The moment the Queen finishes her course, every single plate at the table is cleared. Instantly. If you were a second too slow, or if you were stuck listening to a duke's long-winded story, your plate was snatched away before you even picked up your fork. Courtiers frequently left these 1,000-guinea banquets literally starving. You'd go back to your freezing room and eat stale bread in the dark because you were too exhausted to do anything else. Yet hunger was nothing compared to the Highland problem. By the mid-1860s, a new figure haunted the palace halls, and he was the ultimate threat to your career. His name was John Brown. He was a rough-mannered Scottish servant who had become the Queen's closest confidant. He didn't follow the Lord Chamberlain's code. He didn't use the table of precedence. He spoke to the Queen with a bluntness that bordered on insults, and she loved him for it. For a career courtier, Brown was a walking landmine. He was the gatekeeper. If you offended him, you didn't just lose your job, you lost your access to the Queen. The aristocrats hated him, calling him the Queen's stallion behind closed doors. You were caught in the crossfire of a class war. If you were too nice to Brown, the nobility would shun you. If you were too cold, the Queen would banish you. You were walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers, and the rope was fraying. The pressure to remain perfect was so high that many courtiers suffered what we would today call total nervous breakdowns. But in 1865, there was no mental health leave. You were either fit for service or you were a failure. And just when you thought you'd mastered the silence, the poison, and the politics, the sun would go down. That's when the night watch began. Because in the Victorian court, the Queen's grief didn't sleep, and neither did her secrets. You were about to discover that the most dangerous thing in Buckingham Palace wasn't the arsenic in the walls, but the truth about what happened behind the Queen's bedroom door after the candles were blown out. Night falls on London, but inside the silk-lined walls of Buckingham, darkness never brings rest. When the gas lamps hiss their final toxic breaths before being extinguished, the night watch begins. This is when the truth behind Queen Victoria's bedroom door is revealed. Not dark political conspiracies or earth-shattering secrets like the rumors suggest, but a bone-chilling, absolute loneliness. You stand there, a shadow in the freezing corridor, listening to the muffled sobs of the woman who holds the fate of a quarter of the globe. Buckingham's greatest secret isn't hidden in safes full of diamonds. It lies in the sheer fragility of a dynasty held together by a suffocating thread of ritual. Every knot in this perilous life is finally untangled at the very boundary of sacrifice. You realize that John Brown isn't the enemy. He is a mirror reflecting a monarch's desperate desire to just be human. His rough presence among the velvet corridors is the exact crack needed to keep the Queen from fading completely into nothingness after Albert's death. And you, the courtier who learned how to walk backwards without stumbling, who inhaled arsenic fumes just to keep the air around the throne pristine, are the silent hero of a golden age. The cost of service is the erasure of your own identity, but the reward is eternal existence. You are no longer an individual with private ambitions. You have become a part of the heartbeat of history. The grueling rules of the Lord Chamberlain, the starving banquets, and those toxic corridors weren't meant to torture you. They were meant to forge the operating system of the greatest empire humanity had ever seen. As you stand tall in the shadows of the palace, watching the sun rise over the Mall, you finally understand that the silence you've kept for so long is the true power of the crown. We started this journey fearing a gilded cage, but we ended with a profound realization. Buckingham in 1865 isn't just a location, it is a cathedral of absolute discipline and loyalty. Every step backward, every whispered word, and every silent endurance has woven the brilliant tapestry of British history. You aren't just serving a woman in mourning clothes, you are protecting the soul of an era. In the cold silence of the palace, surrounded by ghosts of the past and the toxic fumes of the present, you find the ultimate meaning. True freedom sometimes lies in accepting the chains of duty to become part of something vastly greater than yourself. That is the real halo behind the velvet curtains. A glorious, painful truth that only those brave enough to live in the Queen's shadow will ever understand. But 1865 was merely one silent heartbeat in a world meticulously constructed on secrets and shadows. The widow of Windsor wasn't the only figure whose grief shaped a nation, and Buckingham wasn't the only gilded cage where the cost of existence was your very soul. History has always preferred the polished marble over the toxic arsenic hidden beneath it. But you've now proven you have the stomach for the unvarnished truth. By stepping into these corridors with us today, you've moved beyond being a mere spectator. You've become a witness to the raw humanity that power often tries to erase. There are more heavy velvet curtains yet to be drawn back, more echoes of silent banquets, more psychological survival games, and more rituals that once held the world together by a single fraying thread. If you believe that the most vital parts of history are the ones the books were too terrified to print, then your place is here, within this circle of observers. This isn't about collecting dates or names. It's about reclaiming the lost voices that history attempted to silence. To ensure the shadows never grow too long, and the truth of the human spirit is never forgotten, mark your presence by joining this archive. We have more chambers of power to unlock, and more secrets that the sun never set on, waiting just beyond the next turn in the corridor. The journey into the dark heart of the empire continues, and your name is already written in the register. Let's see what else remains hidden in the dark.